Thank you, Ben. All right, next up we have Scott Gallaway. He's the Financial Assistance Program Outreach with the Texas Water Development Board. He's going to be talking about funding opportunities available from TWDB. So please join me in welcoming Scott to the stage. It'll just be that green clicker.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for the introduction. And I'm so happy that the Regional Water Planning Supply Group went first, because many of my topics will talk about water supply planning in the state. So again, I'm Scott Gallaway with the Texas Water Development Board. I'm a funding outreach specialist, and what that means is I help communities navigate the process of Water Development Board funding programs, financial assistance programs. Today I'm going to share some new grant information, some new future funding from Proposition 4. It's new funding from that program. And then talk about our existing funding programs and how that process is open right now. But we'll go ahead and get started. The Texas Water Development Board, non-regulatory state agency. We're water resource planners, and we function like a bank. Loans and grants for political subdivisions of the city, of the state. So cities, counties, river authorities, municipal utility districts, and often water supply corporations are eligible for our financial assistance programs. We have a variety of programs, both federal and state dollars, all for drinking water, wastewater, and flood mitigation work. But we also are big on planners. We support and process the state water supply planning document, the water plan, and then also the flood plan, the state flood plan. And as we just learned and heard the details of the regional planning processes, the state is divided into regional groups. Regions and regional people know the best about their situations, their local situation. Those regional groups produce regional plans based on local input, local data, and then the state of Texas just rolls those regional plans into the state water plan or the state flood plan. And I'll talk about some of those details coming up. One thing that the Water Development Board is interested in is water supply or water data in general. Any type of water data, groundwater, surface water, of course, stream flow, weather, climate, water use, water loss, those type of things. So if you are a public system, a drinking water system or a wastewater system, and you receive a survey form from the Water Development Board, please fill that out and send it back to us, because our programs are based on good quality local data. It's the backbone of our planning processes, is good quality local data. So we'll start with the flow of the pipe on the science, the collecting data. Drinking water systems have 3 reports they report to us annually. We call them our self-reports. These are for drinking water systems. There's one on water use, how the water is being used locally, water loss, and then conservation plan reporting. Those reports, though, are tied to the planning processes and to funding. So typically on the water supply systems, the reporting go to either Public Works Director, Utility Superintendent, someone like that on the operations side of a drinking water system. For water use, it's where is the water being used from? Is it surface water? Is it groundwater? What are the type of water categories? Is there any ag water associated with it, agriculture, irrigation water? Or is it all residential, domestic use? Or is there industrial uses? Those are the type of questions that we ask on this survey form. The other survey form is water loss. How much water is being lost in the drinking water distribution system? That's from the water well source or a raw water intake on a stream or reservoir, meter reading at that location, a meter reading at the treatment plant after the water has been purified, and then finally, the customer's meters. What is that amount of water from that raw water source to the customer? Is all the water making it to the customer? That's important for conservation, but it's more important for the drinking water system because every drop of water they produce is a penny or a drop of revenue. And so the Water Development Board and the industry standards hope to have good, tight drinking water systems, and so they're capturing the water resource itself and all the revenue associated with producing that water. And then finally, planning or reporting on water conservation programs and activities. Those 3 reports must be up to date to access the funding. They are required by state law, they're required for all public drinking water systems to report on this information: water use, water loss, conservation. If they're a large system, 3,300 connections or greater, they report annually. If they're a small system, they report every 5 years. And they're required to do that if they even never intend to use Water Development Board funding. But if they do want to access our funding, grants and loans, they have to be up to date on the water supply reports. That's going to come up critically in my next couple of slides when I talk about a new grant funding opportunity. And I'll mention these again, I think I mentioned that again, these are for political subdivisions. Our funding, Water Development Board funding, is political subdivisions, counties, cities, districts, water supply corporations, typically a public entity. Brand new, though, is House Bill 500, the Water Supply and Infrastructure Grant. This grant program was just announced in January, last month, January 5th. It's a one-time opportunity for a 100% grant for drinking water supply projects. And that's extremely rare. Water Development Board does have grants. We also have a variety of loans, but rarely is one a 100% grant. So this is a very rare opportunity for water supply systems. This is a one-time funding opportunity. Once these funds are utilized and the grants are approved, this funding will dry up and go away. But it is a time frame that's open now. We just ended a public comment period last week. Application season will be coming up in March and July, but those specific dates haven't been established yet. But here are the program or project requirements for drinking water systems. You have to address water loss. Remember, I talked about earlier water loss, losing water through either leaky pipes or maybe even on a accounting methodology, but water loss has to be addressed. Regulatory violations have to be addressed from TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the air, water, and solid waste regulators in the state, or provide additional water supply. So what's additional water supply? In this definition for House Bill 500, it's fairly broad. It can be a new well, it could be a new raw water intake from a reservoir or a stream, but it also can be infrastructure such as storage tanks, ground storage tanks, elevated storage tanks, new pipelines, things that will add additional water supply to an existing drinking water system. And just one application per applicant, and it can't be funded through a past TWDB program. These numbers are draft numbers. Again, we just had a public comment period that ended last week. Our executives are now taking those public comments, going through a finalized opportunity for this grant program, but this is what we have proposed to the citizens and drinking water systems of the state. These numbers could look somewhat different once the final version has come out, but it's categorized by population. And you can see there are caps and designated targets for drinking water systems based on population. The large systems have to be bid ready, ready to proceed with a construction project. Smaller systems, medium-sized and smaller systems have the opportunity to have planning, property acquisition, if they need to purchase site for a new well system or new line work opportunity, they can have these funds are available through land acquisition, and then design, typically what the consulting engineer's blueprints are. But large systems have to be construction ready, where the smaller systems have a little bit more time to do the planning, acquisition, and design if needed. Also, there's $100 million designated for irrigation canal lining or pipeline replacement. This is taking earthen canals and lining them with concrete or converting those into pipeline projects. So there's specific earmarks or designated categories for canal lining and the drinking water systems themselves. One of the criteria, this is also true on numerous grants that we offer, is based on annual median household income. This is a U.S. Census Bureau number that we use to rank economic disadvantaged communities. There's a calculation here. The community will look at the Texas number, the 76,292 number is the state of Texas annual median household income. You'll plug in the system's annual median household income and to do the calculation to determine if the community meets the definition of an economic disadvantaged community. Since this is a one-time grant, 100% grant, we expect a lot of competition. We expect to exceed the $1 billion that will be available for this grant opportunity. So we do have a ranking metrics or criteria system to rank those projects for entities who are applying for this grant. Timeline right now. We just, as I mentioned a few times, the public comment period ended February 4th. March through July will be an application solicitation period where we will be receiving applications, but those definite specific dates have not been published yet. But mostly it'll be the end of or middle of July, end of July when the applications are due. Commitments and closings, those are two internal terms for Water Development Board. Commitment means we commit to a project through one of our formal actions saying, yes, it's an eligible project. We believe in this project. We commit to it. The closing is our formal action where our board of directors slams the gavel and says, here's the funding for the local community. This is an accelerated time frame compared to our existing programs. Many of you have used our existing programs, know it's a slow, tedious process, especially on the federal grant side. This program is intended to get the money into Texas communities, drinking water systems quickly. And so we have this accelerated timeline, and then we also have a few compliance requirements that are outside of our normal procedure. One of them being an affidavit for environmental compliance. That will be up on the drinking water system to submit an affidavit saying they are following all environmental compliance regulations. For our existing programs, we actually do a review of those compliance documents and making sure the communities are compliant, but this time we will not. It will be up on the drinking water system. Applications need to be complete at the deadline opportunity. Those self-reports that I mentioned at the very beginning on water loss, water use, and conservation, those must be up to date. An applicant has to have an independent financial audit. We function like a bank. We're always want to see the most recent audit from a water system or political subdivision. And so sometimes communities may not have an updated audit, but that's going to be a requirement for this particular grant opportunity. And I mentioned the ready to proceed, especially for the large communities. They have to be bid ready to proceed, bid ready for construction materials, contractors, those type of things. We're going to rely on TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, for the readiness to proceed approvals, and then we will issue a certificate of approval once the project is completed. Okay. Any questions on House Bill 500? It's, again, a new grant opportunity. There is a wonderful website that we offer, and I have a link to that coming up later. There's a good frequently asked questions document associated with this House Bill 500 grant. Take a look at that if you have more questions. Something else I just wanted to highlight because it had so much media attention, though, is the Senate Bill 3 for flood warning systems. This is the flood response, the state's flood response to the July 4th tragedy in the Hill Country area. This is new funding from the legislature, grant opportunities for flood warning systems, but just only for those communities impacted by the governor's disaster declaration. So there's 30 counties, mainly in the Hill Country area, for this grant opportunity. Just wanted you to be aware of that so you'd know that there is progress. I know we saw a lot of headlines after that event, and this is what the state's response is. We are busy working on contracting with those communities in those impacted areas right now to get those flood warning systems installed. The big one, though, that made a lot of media attention back in November, Constitutional Proposition 4, voters approved Prop 4 back in November, $1 billion a year for the Texas Water Development Board for infrastructure projects over the next 20 years. It's a designated sales tax carve-out to directly fund water supply and some flood and some wastewater projects for the Water Development Board. The funding, though, is broken into two categories. Aging infrastructure, we hear a lot about aging infrastructure and how we need to improve the systems that were installed decades ago. And then new water supplies, is 50% of the money is designated for new supplies. So what is new supplies? We'll have a couple of slides coming up, but the very bottom bullet point is fall of 2029 is when the dollars will be available to local cities, districts, public water supply communities, political subdivisions of the state. There's also numerous guardrails and safety nets for this proposition funding. The state has to collect $46.5 billion before the money starts flowing to Texas Water Development Board. So the state has a $46.5 billion tax revenue goal, and then above that, Water Development Board will receive $1 billion a year annually. So new water supplies, get a lot of questions on new water supplies. Desalination projects, produced water from the oil and gas industry, aquifer storage and recovery. We're already doing a lot of aquifer storage and recovery projects, but this new funding will enhance it for new water supply category. Reuse, again, we're doing numerous reuse, both of the drinking water side and wastewater side currently, and we have been for numerous years, the last 20 years or so, but there are specific carve-outs for new water supplies using reuse, desalination, and then the one big one is the acquisition of water or water rights from outside of Texas. We've never had that opportunity in legislation before, so now this funding does have that availability. And the other thing is reservoirs. New reservoirs are identified as receiving this new water supply category. We have numerous reservoirs in the state water plan that are proposed reservoirs across the state. But one thing that's carved out of this particular funding is the land has to already be obtained by the local applicant. That's huge. You can't use these funds for eminent domain processes. The local entity, if it's a city or a regional water authority or a county, they have to already own the property. They already have to have permitting in place. Corps of Engineers 404 permitting and TCEQ stream diversion permitting has to be in place to tap into this new reservoir funding for this Proposition 4 category. How does it work? It goes into the Texas Water Fund, and it flows into these buckets of existing funding programs. All the little buckets at the bottom are either state or federal dollar infrastructure programs, and so the new Prop 4 dollars, $1 billion a year, will flow into existing programs. That's great. I like that idea a lot because these programs, most of them have existed for a long time. They're well-defined, well-documented. Rules, policy, regulations are already in place. Now we will just have additional funds for those individual buckets. Leading up to my next one, our existing programs. This is what's available today. Let me rephrase that. Some of these programs are available today. One thing that I want you to take away, this is very important to know about Water Development Board funding. All of these programs, even if they're state or federal programs, they function on an annual cycle. The annual cycle is closely aligned with the state fiscal year or federal fiscal year, but the detail is this. You can go to the link and read about it, but the detail is this. Some of these programs' details change year to year. The big thing that changes is the dollar amount that is available to the local community. What's available to drinking water systems, flood mitigation projects, wastewater projects. That dollar amount does change from year to year. Other caveats can change, requirements, those type of details. My point is these programs are usually available. Some years, though, these programs that are listed on this one, the first one of them is the economically disadvantaged program. We're not accepting applications because we don't have any cash in that particular program. So things can change from year to year. Starting September 1, every new fiscal year, we release documentation showing what's available for this fiscal year. Key funding programs or key points, the red box, Texas, state of Texas is blessed with AAA bond rating from Standard & Poor's and Fitch, the rating communities. That helps with local cities, local systems. If they're not rated or they have a poor rating, they can piggyback on Texas AAA bond rating to get the lowest fixed interest cost. All of our programs on the loan side are fixed rate. They're subsidized interest rates either by state or federal dollars, so it's always the lowest interest rates that you can get for water infrastructure projects. You can always beat open market rate by going to a local bank or even issuing your own bonds. Something else that's important to know, these programs that I'm talking about are for capital projects, projects you would find in a master plan, a capital improvements plan, asset management plan, something like that. They're typically capital projects. We can't finance operation or maintenance cost, and we don't have emergency response funding. Like if there's a tornado or a hurricane or something like that, we don't have these programs available to readily help a system that's in distress with funding. It's going to be either FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, or TDEM, Texas Department of Emergency Management. The blue box, though, is important to know. We talk about funding a project at the Water Development Board. So what's a project? That could be any type of capital project, a new well, a new treatment plant, lift stations on the wastewater side, digesters, line work, meters, those type of infrastructure projects. But we further break it down into different phases of eligible expenses, which are planning and permitting, feasibility reports, environmental reports, the design, again, the blueprints that the consulting engineer is drawing up, property acquisition, and then construction. And for these existing programs, construction can be new facilities or rehabilitation and improvement of existing facilities. We do a lot of rehab and updating work and then new facilities also. How does it work? Typically, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we function on an annual cycle. We have a solicitation period that starts each mid-December with due dates staggered over the spring. February 2nd was a big due date for some water supply planning projects. March 6th is a huge milestone date coming up for some of the federal grants. But we open the solicitation period, accept the applications, process, review, and rank by merit those applications. We produce a document called the Intended Use Plan. It's a reporting tool to describe how these public funds are being used. It's also a tool to let the communities know how the programs function. We approve that plan, and then we just start loaning or granting out the grant approvals, and then we repeat the process again the next year. So it's on that annual cycle, applications, reviews, loan out the funds, then repeat the process again. The reason I say that, if a community is not prepared for like March 6th coming up here in a few weeks, they should start preparing today for March 6th or the early March of 2027. We'll have a due date in that time frame also. The State Water Implementation Fund for Texas, this is a state dollar program tied directly to regional water supply planning. We heard from Region A in the planning processes, all the data they collect, all the information that goes into those regional plans. The state's divided up into these 16 regional groups. Again, regions produce their own plan. State of Texas rolls those regional plans up. This is your place to have your local voice heard, both on water supply planning and then on the flood planning. My next slide, we'll talk about flood planning processes, but that's the public forum to let your regional representatives to know about what you're thinking, what's needed in the regions on water supply planning. The caveat, though, to tap into this program, this SWIFT program, your project has to be identified in those regional plans with a capital cost, and then it also has to be identified in either a regional or state water plan, and you have access, you unlock an access to this state dollar funding program for SWIFT. It has to be a water management strategy. We post an interactive state water plan on our website so you can drill down and look at county level or water supply level to see if projects are, what type of projects are already identified in these plans. The bridge application was due back in February. If you didn't make it this time, we'll repeat the process again. We'll have another February 2027 due date coming up for next year. Flood Infrastructure Fund is the same way. This is a designated state dollar flood program tied to flood planning processes. Again, the state's divided up into regional flood planning groups. They produce their own regional plan. Water Development Board rolls those up into the state plan. If you participate in the flood planning process, you can unlock this Flood Infrastructure Fund, another source of funding for flood mitigation projects. This program looks like we're going to most likely have a solicitation period in early 27, next January, for applications for this flood mitigation project and flood infrastructure fund. One thing too I'll mention, at the top of all these next few slides, we have these boxes, who's eligible, security instruments, if it's a bond or a loan agreement and so forth. If you're a city, you must issue bonds. Texas Water Development Board will be a direct purchaser of those bonds. We put those bonds in our portfolio and then loan out the proceeds. That's our preferred method for any political subdivision, but if you don't have the ability to issue bonds, we can work with loan agreement contracts. The other big thing to know is the typical pledge repayment, especially on the loans. How will you pay us back? Most communities tie this to water and sewer rates, but you don't have to. It can be any type of tax revenue. And then terms, 20 or 30-year terms, that's the local system's choice, how long they want to finance a project. This program, though, is always available. This Texas Water Development Fund, or D-Fund as we call it, we always have this program available. It's our oldest funding program. Out of this one program, you can do both drinking water, wastewater, and flood mitigation work under one loan program. Pretty easy program to access, minimal reporting requirements, and so, but it is a 100% low interest loan. We also have water conservation grants and loans. A due date coming up March 18th for grants. State agencies and political subdivisions are eligible recipients of this grant, but it's mainly for equipment sharing and demonstration type projects. And I know numerous of the groundwater conservation districts over the years have received some of this funding. And then the loan program too. Again, political subdivisions are eligible, but it's really demonstration style projects, conservation projects at the, for a political subdivision as an example of how to do conservation in a local area. These programs right here are federal programs. These are the state revolving funds. These are federal dollars from the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. States across the country participate in this program. The clean water program has been around since the 1980s. The drinking water program since the 1990s. Many communities rely on these programs for infrastructure improvements. They are a split grant, 70% grant, 30% loan. So if a community comes in for $1 million project, they only have to pay back $300,000. We've had, as again mentioned, we've had these programs since the 80s and 90s. These are by far our most popular because of the grant opportunity. These programs are oversubscribed, meaning we receive way more applicants than we have dollars for annually, but it is a great opportunity for a grant for drinking water or wastewater. It's based on a numeric scoring system. Some of the big point scoring are this. If you're an economic disadvantage community, that's 30 points right there. If you're a rural system, if you're a small system, there are points there. If you have green projects or any type of water or energy savings that the community can document, that gives you points in the scoring system. So on your application, you're trying to score as high as possible. The communities that score the most points are the ones that most likely receive the funding. Applications are due March 6th. If you're not prepared this year, keep us in mind for next year, March of 27. We produce these intended use plans, great resource documents to give you a snapshot of what they look like, but all the details are identified in these intended use plans. All of these intended use plans are available on our website. Got 2 programs I'm going to wrap up with on technical assistance. These programs are fairly new, just in the last couple of years with Water Development Board. These programs are designed for small rural communities that just don't have a lot of resources. We've partnered with consulting engineering firms. Community can apply for this technical assistance programs. If they're eligible and we receive the application, we'll match them with a consulting engineer to help them develop an asset management plan. Asset management plan is a tool to help them manage your assets, their inventory, their condition, but most importantly, when they either need to be repaired or replaced with a dollar value. Also, the next one, similar, is water utilities technical assistance program. Again, we've partnered with consulting firms. Communities have to apply for this funding. If they receive the funding, then they can do things like water rate studies, conservation plans, even help with our own Water Development's own project information forms and abridged applications, the initial applications to apply for funding. They can help with those details. And a community can apply anytime. I mentioned earlier, most of the time, most of our programs are on a state funding cycle, annual cycle. This particular program, you can apply anytime. What is helpful today? We always want to see a financial audit. So if you have a recent financial audit, that's good. If you're prepared for bond issuance, if your city manager, financial analyst, financial department are all on board with issuing bonds, that's important. The ability to take on debt is going to be, credit analysis is going to be conducted. Will the project be tied to water and sewer rates? If so, are those rates sustainable for funding? And then the self-reports on loss, conservation, and water use survey. These next few slides are just direct links to some of the topics I've talked about this afternoon. We have a wonderful website at the Water Development Board, but the board does such a variety of things on the planning side and funding side. Just some direct links to take you to some of the topics I've mentioned this afternoon. The best one is this one, the yellow highlight. Subscribe to our newsletter. That's the best way to keep up to date with due dates, funding opportunities, changes in process and programs, and you can keep up to date with subscribing to the newsletter. So I hope that's not too much. 30 minutes is just a short introduction to these topics. One thing that I and my team do, we host in-person funding workshops. We'll be in Amarillo in June, on June 9th at the Regional Planning Commission. I'll be there. But we take a deep dive into the application process, eligibility, timelines, those details. Be happy to share more details with you about all these different funding opportunities by attending the workshop. So that's any questions before I wrap it up? All right, well, thank you so much for the opportunity.